Welcome. My name is Huschke. I'm the Executive Director for the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. We're gathered here today with some attendees from our recent Truth, Reckoning, and Right Relationship with the Great Lakes event that took place in April at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Cleveland, Ohio. And like we did with part one that took place also in Cleveland at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame back in October of last year, we want to gather a few folks that were present and just kind of get a sense of, thoughts, reflections, ideas that came out of being all together there a few months back. And so really appreciate the three of you making time to do this. I'm going to go around and just introduce you, and would love if you can give just a little bit of background of who you are and maybe what you're involved in. Where you're at. And then I'm also going to ask each of you, if you can, in a couple of words, give a sense of how you felt after the 2-day gathering that we had together there in April. Like if you could give it a word or two or three, what would it be? So that's our challenge to get us rolling here. And then after that, would love just to get into some conversation about, just thoughts, ideas around the event itself, maybe what you're carrying forward with that, and really just how that relates to each of your own worlds and maybe the world at large. So again, appreciate you guys for taking the time. Peter, if you wouldn't mind getting us going here, Peter Whitehouse. Yeah, where are you at, Peter? And maybe a little bit of background of who you are.
So thank you, Kai. Just a couple minutes. Is that what you're thinking to start?
I think that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. So I'm Peter Whitehouse. I'm located on the southern shores of Lake Erie. And I put it that way because I do work on bioregionalism. I'm a professor at Case Western Reserve University, where I'm a geriatric neurologist. So I work, and my wife and I started intergenerational public schools. So I'm very much in the space of helping us understand the meta crisis, which is what I call it, in which the climate crisis is part of it. Obviously, Cleveland has a long history of environmental injustice that connects into climate injustice. I focus on the health aspects of the climate crisis. We have a Case Western Reserve University Climate and Health Education Collaborative that met this morning, and then the Case Western Reserve Climate Action Network. And some other things that connect. So health, intergenerational relationships, ethics. I'm helping to celebrate the 75th anniversary of Aldo Leopold's San Calte Almanac because for various reasons, which I won't elaborate, but I'll mention ethics. So I was really inspired by part two because I partly by CELDF itself, the idea that you are in a state of transition as an organization that has gotten somewhat frustrated about trying to play into the systems game, even when you play the legal card, and that question about whether the law or culture precede each other. For me, it's a no-brainer. It's culture first. I've really enjoyed getting to know Tish. And we've had a couple of meetings actually since the meeting. Max, was familiar with your work and Bright Green Lies, and really enjoyed your skepticism, shall I say that? And I believe, and I'll end up with this. Sundance was there, and the whole issue of Indigenous voices and Indigenous art, I think, is really important for me because Ohio is not a place where you can strongly associate one particular Indigenous group with particular regions. At least I could have had a hard time doing that. Sundance said there's a history to that. But I very much appreciated Summer and the other Indigenous voices that were at the meeting. So I'm very much in. So my words that to do my homework were possibility, transformation, and focus, which reflects to a certain extent what I felt was in the meeting, but also what I think the words that I carry forward to things. And by the way, we have a climate action month at the university, and Tish and I are working on doing a program at that event. So we really have some people have continued to collaborate and interact thanks to your group bringing us together, Kai. And that's my probably 3 or 4 minute report. Apologies.
That's wonderful, Peter. And I'm hoping we can maybe even get into that last word, focus. I'm very curious to see what that means to you or how that's been applied so far, and where you see that going from here. I also think some of what you just said at the end about the collection and diversity of people we had present there in Cleveland is a good setup to have Summer Garcia introduce herself and get us to know a little bit about her, and also maybe what she took away from our time together there in Cleveland. Summer.
Bonjour, I'm Summer Garcia. I'm a Green Projects Coordinator for our Heritage Center here in Walpole Island, which is Bkejwanong Territory. It's a tiny island located in the middle of the St. Clair River. So we have a lot of the big shipping that goes through. I partly work with Parks Canada in helping create a national urban park that is within our shared territory of Windsor, LaSalle. And I'm also, I work with my community for our food sovereignty, Indigenous food sovereignty, and our food security. So I'm currently working on getting a greenhouse project up and running for our community. So what else about me? Or you wanted the three the 3 words? What I took away from it was inspiring, diversity, and connection. I felt full of energy when I left the meeting. And I think a lot of that had to do with the diversity of people that were there, and just being able to connect with everyone. I really enjoyed the activities that you had planned for each one. Like I almost felt like it almost seemed like there wasn't enough time for each one, because the conversations were just so engrossing, right? Like everyone was just really into it, and I thought that was great.
Yeah, no, I think this is probably representative of this group, that we give ourselves impossible tasks. So yeah, I think you're right. It would have been nice to have much more time and run at a different pace of time than we had. So, but no, also would love to hear more about just elements of the energy that you mentioned, Summer, and I think maybe some of the conversation we'll get into, we'll pull that out. Lastly, joining us is Max Wilbert. Max, if you want to also kind of give us a sense of where you're at on the planet and a little bit about yourself.
Sure. Hi, Kai, and everyone else. My name is Max Wilbert, and I live in Eugene, Oregon, or the vicinity of Eugene, Oregon. I'm from Pacific Northwest, so it was a long way for me to come to be there for this event, but I was very glad to be there. My background is as a community activist and community organizer, especially on environmental issues. I've been working especially on mining issues for the last 3 or 4 years, in close collaboration with other environmentalists and a bunch of Native folks and several different tribes in Nevada, Oregon, and a little bit into Eastern California as well. in the Great Basin region, mostly northern Paiute country. Um, the My work over the years has also, Peter mentioned, I'm an author. I co-wrote a book called Bright Green Lies: How the Environmental Movement Lost Its Way and What We Can Do About It. And that book is it's a critique of green technology like solar, wind, electric vehicles, but from an environmentalist perspective, from the perspective of people who have been fighting fossil fuel pipelines and fighting global warming, and see that issue as a real crisis, and yet at the same time see these technological, mainstream, profit-driven capitalist growth maintaining solutions. I could go on and on. I wrote a whole book, of course, as representing more of an attempt for industrial civilization to sustain itself rather than an attempt to sustain nature. And so I see these as sort of being a perversion of sustainability and a twisting of, the real ethic of love and reverence for land and water and air and all the amazing creatures we share this world with. So that's my work. I've been involved in a lot of different stuff over the years, as I mentioned, and coming to the event in Cleveland at MoCA, I wasn't really sure what to expect, but I thought it was an excellent event. I thought it was quite powerful to just get people together and have an essentially emotional experience. So often these types of conferences and gatherings can be intensely intellectual and so focused on data and information and people talking at you and statistics and that type of thing. And I don't think that type of stuff is important. There's a place for information, the data, but people aren't moved by that primarily. I think we're really moved by our hearts ultimately, and we're moved by relationships. And so, when it comes to what my 3 words were, I really have 4. If you give me a bit of a transition word, I wrote facilitation of organic relationships down. That seems important to me. Very important.
All right. I think we can let the 1 extra word slide this time. So actually your comment is a great lead in, Max, just around my own curiosity on how each of your expectations matched up against your experience, meaning coming into this event, this gathering for 2 days, if you can recall, what were you thinking? And then, we heard a little bit about what came out of it through your 3 words there, but yeah, like, did your expectations, I guess, what were they, and did the event meet those expectations? Did it kind of go in different directions? Like, it sounds like all of you had a very positive outcome, but just kind of curious, like, what you thought coming into it versus, what was the experience coming out of it? So got a little bit from you, Max. I don't know if you had more you want to add to that, or if Peter or Summer, you want to kind of jump in.
I would just say that it exceeded my expectations, the second part, because we had Montana and I had went to the first part. So I think that's what we were expecting for the second part. And not that, like, we really enjoyed the first part as well, but I really thought that it was great that on the second part there was so much more interaction with each other, rather than just being only presentation kind of style, which is fine. And I really enjoyed the testimonies that were presented in the first part. But I thought the connection with people of the different activities that we had to share with each other was that exceeded my expectations, I would say.
But you, Peter? You're on mute if you're trying to talk.
I switched to a different headset. Can you hear me okay?
We sure can.
Yeah, great. So I had a kind of not very distinct set of expectations. I wasn't there part one. I agree completely with Max's characterization of relationships and stories are so valuable, and some are, to your point, I mean, absolutely the engagement with the diverse communities. My lens in was through law, in some sense, because I had studied a little bit about the rights of nature, but not about the community actions that CELDF's been involved in. And another resource person who's a close friend of mine in Cleveland, David Nash, started the Corporate Sustainability Roundtable out of the School of Law at Cleveland State University. And he has kind of seen the light, and so he's another lawyer. And I won't go on. There are other groups at Case Western that are kind of allies thinking about these broader issues. Yeah, I thought it was interactive. I thought in many ways it could have even been more interactive. I actually was also drawn to MoCA because I am a big believer that art and music and dance are major sources of transformation for culture, and that's what we need at a very broad level of reinventing civilization, or going back, and I don't mean that pejoratively, to a more indigenous perspective. So I'm a great critic of neoliberalism and so on. I think it was a little bit, the reason I use the word focus was in part motivated by my conversations with my friend Corey Dakin, who was the media support person for it. But Corey is a very engaging mind who came into several of my groups and made his own contributions. So he was in the background, but not. And MoCA itself is having some challenges figuring out what kind of events it should host that fulfill its new mission statement, which is something like art now in progress. Kind of a clever, catchy expression. And they've just hired a new senior associate director or some title like that, and chief curator. So when I use the word transformation, I was focusing on CELDF's interesting journey, which I felt I wanted to learn about, as well as MoCA's interesting journey, which converge on this point of how does art engage community in a way that leads to dramatic transformation at the level that Max and Summer were describing, the emotional relationship side.
Yeah, I'd love to dive more into that. I want to see if we can just hold just maybe one more ask around the gathering itself. And then I think, Peter, you're setting up a great conversation just around, that convergence of art and culture and activism, and which clearly was an intention of the event itself. But yeah, what does it look like in our everyday world? I think I'd like to explore that with the three of you. But again, just curious, each of you kind of have hinted at this, but I'm wondering, was there a particular moment, whether it was part of the structured program or something unstructured, that really stands out for you, a conversation you had, a thought that went through your head, something that you heard, over those 2 days that you can recall? And again, I know it's been a couple months and we're all off to other things, but just wondering if there's something that kind of stands out more than anything else for any of you.
For me, as an Indigenous person, what stood out for me was that, so our teachings I've known for, growing up, that water, trees, plants, animals, everything has a spirit, and is considered our relations. So we would consider them to be our relatives. And they have just as much right as we do to be here. And so for me, growing up that way, but when going off into the non-native communities, and seeing the difference between that way of thinking, and it was always against, it was more evolved around money, and that was what was important. So for me to go into a setting where there's just a diversity of people, and to hear those thoughts coming from those teachings coming out of others' conversations and way of seeing the world, and how those things need to be changed back to that way of being. That felt a little bit emotional for me, because it I guess I would say that it gave me hope, because I often think about my children and the world that they're growing up in, and when I don't hear people saying or speaking in that way, and respecting all living things, that's really concerning. And so just to be in that environment and to hear everybody's thoughts, and just vibrating on that same sort of level, it was just it filled me. I would say it filled me with hope.
Yeah, thank you for that. I actually, since being there in Cleveland, some of your words, Summer, have stayed with me, especially when you talked about, just that we're in constant relationship with water, and, are we aware of that, and how does that look? And I mean, anytime I pour, a cup of water for myself, that's almost every time now that comment of yours comes up to me, and I appreciate that you said those words. And so I think that is a big piece of what we were hoping would happen over those 2 days. So Max or Peter, anything that kind of stands out for the two of you, again, whether it was part of something programmatically, something you may have had a side conversation with, something you observed, whatever it might have been? I'd be curious to see if there was something like that for either of you.
It felt powerful for me to have, I guess I would echo what Summer said, just entering into a space where a reverence for the world is taken as a given. It's very different, and that's something that you all help facilitate in various ways, I think, through art and poetry and music, and walking outside during the walk that we did with the local herbalist woman, and learning a little bit from you, Summer, about some of the traditions of your people, and just like all these different experiences, I think, help to pull us out of this dissociated, disconnected state that we get into all the time in this culture. And I think that's the power that there is in an approach like this, is that once that has happened, or once that process is in progress, it changes what you're able to do from there. And I think that, obviously there's only so much you can do during a couple days. It's not like you're able to shift people's entire worldviews and so on. This is still, as we're talking about, the really revolutionary transformations that are needed in our cultures in the world. if we're to face these crises that we're going through with some success, then it's going to take a lot more of that. But this is it was a powerful template, and I think that was even a word that you, Kai, or Tish, or someone else with CELDF used when talking about this event, was like, how do we create some sort of template or process that can be adapted and reused and improved over time? And I thought it was quite powerful how the event moved from that those activities that I mentioned that helped us sort of collectively shift our mindset and get on the same page emotionally, to towards the end of the sessions discussing more concrete strategizing, and what does change look like, and what methods are we going to use, and how are we going to do that, and getting into small groups. To me, obviously, for that process to be successful, that process of strategizing then needs to be followed by organizing, by action, by education, by this reciprocal spiraling ongoing process. And I think that I think that the event as a whole did a really good job of starting to model that template, and it was a powerful alternative to some of what I've seen before, which I mentioned when we were getting started, about just information dense conferences and gatherings and discussions on these topics, and instead recognizing that putting in all that time up front on the sort of emotional and even spiritual level, it opens up the ability for some deeper and more meaningful and more lasting discussions on what to do and how we're going to do it and how we work together and so on.
Thanks for that, Max. Peter, you're on mute if you're talking to us.
I am. Thank you again. Sorry. So actually, one memorable event was I skipped the morning session of day 2 for various reasons. One of which was, to a certain extent, I wasn't sure where I was in the process, and I ran into Kai coming in, and he reinforced what I had a sense of the meeting was, you really need commitment. I felt, Kai, I'm not trying to be critical of you. I felt like, gee, I really had not let the group down. I wasn't there for those couple of hours. I actually had some interesting things going. So from the very beginning, there was this sense that you needed to commit. There are some meetings where you say you're going to go and you don't go the whole thing. I missed that meeting session. So the culture of commitment, the culture of contributing to a group. I thought, Max, your session with Valerie, I think it was, Will's session, some of the on the podium, on the stage shows were very good. But I agree with you that we could have had a bit more participation. Andrea, I think, could have been brought to the forefront more, because I think it was her work that was the focal point, and she gave one seminar basically. Summer, I thought you said something very honest, if I remember correctly, and I do work with Indigenous peoples. I think your focus on ceremony is really important, because there are many things that Indigenous worldviews give us. You've mentioned some of those. I think the importance of kinship and relationships to Mother Earth and so on. But in some sense, it was a little disappointing that we didn't do more to develop our own practices. Like, what does it really get inside ceremony? And I know that it's kind of a personal thing. There are things that are general about Indigenous perspectives, some of which I just mentioned, you mentioned, but there's also, you can't just go to somebody's ceremony and take that on a ceremony, but to understand more about what ceremony is about, why it's important. And I participated in one other local meeting, and this is my last comment. I was with Corey yesterday. I'm trying to remember the name of the artist. He was in from LA, and he had us actually make artwork. I teased Megan that I was actually, my artwork was displayed at the Museum of Contemporary Art for a period of time. Because there's nothing, I mean, looking at Andrea's artwork and talking to her about art and culture was profound. But I think if we had done a bit more small group participatory, looking deeply in small groups at what ceremony was, and also what it means for you to find your own artistic intentions in the process might have been helpful.
Thanks, Peter. Summer, do you want to say something to just, I'm assuming you've talked about ceremony with people outside of your own tribe there. Like how are some of the things that Peter just mentioned, like how have you worked through that or dealt with that based on what he just said? I don't know if you have anything you'd want to respond to there.
I just think that it's because it's such a personal thing, that it's hard to just, pinpoint what exactly is ceremony, because that can be different for so many different people, right? And what you do for ceremony. And I know some people would use the word ritual. We tend to not use that word just simply because of the persecution that we've had historically, with being, I guess, what people would call witchcraft, and the way that our ceremonies were viewed. But so like when you have such a diverse amount of people, it's hard to just, say this is what ceremony is, right? Because that can be different for each and every person that's within that room. I know what ceremony is to me, but I think it was more posing that question, like for people to consider what is ceremony to you, because what it might be for me might be completely different for you, right? And I just felt like if we were to try and do ceremony, and then especially because it was, 3 of the presentations back to back, that to me felt like it was just disingenuous, right? Because ceremony is something that comes from your heart, not just something that, you're just going along the actions, right? So that's why I know initially we were asked to do ceremony, but it didn't sit well with us to, just do ceremony 3 times in a row. Do you know?
No, I go ahead, Peter. Sorry.
I just wanted to make sure that I was clear. What you just said, Summer, I completely agree with. I don't do ritual and ceremony, although there are some organizations that I participate in that do that. And I think shared ceremony can be, of course, exceedingly powerful. Could we have explored that very idea and talked a bit more about what ceremony and ritual is about in ways that would have perhaps prompted us to think deeply about, I think, your wise decision not to just treat ceremony like a repetitive event that people who are not familiar with the underlying context and culture participate in. So I just want to make, sorry, somebody, I just wanted to say I agree with you. I think you made the right decision.
Yeah, no, I think it's also, I mean, it's something I think that Summer said earlier. I mean, it was the impossibility of time, right? I mean, we we're embarking on an idea, trying to see if there were elements of what those 2 days could then be carried forward in a manner that others could really more deeply engage in the place of what they're a part of, right? Because I think the other big piece that we were trying to convey here is the importance of place. And in this case, we had people from all over places convening in a certain place, but for a lot of people, it's not their place, right? It's not what they're most connected to. And so But I think the intention is to see how this kind of being intentional through these different means can help people have a better connection to one another and to place, and have more time to explore the things like ceremony. I'm sorry, Summer, I cut you off before I went into talking.
Oh, I was just gonna say that we had originally planned to have like that discussion at the end of our presentation, but because of time, that got cut short with everyone. And also, too, when it comes to ceremony, like I know for some of our ceremonies can go on for hours. Like you can be in ceremony from like 5 o'clock till like 3 in the morning, right? We even have like a talking ceremony where everybody sits around in a circle and each one has their time to share what's on their heart. And those can go on for such a long time. You know, so that's just one other thing, is that like ceremony doesn't fit into a little time space. Do you know what I mean? Like you can't put it in a box. It flows how it's gonna flow, just like water.
Yeah. That's I mean, there's been a number of things that each of you have said that wants me to ask just kind of an open kind of question, which is, putting this truth reckoning and right relationship event together, there were considerations of how to do it within a very short time span to all we've been talking about. But more importantly, the intent was it not about, creating memories or discussing the moment of those 2 days, but what do those 2 days maybe bring forward out into the world after those 2 days, either personally or within your own community or your own work and such. And so I'm just curious, like as you think about things like, art and culture and spiritual practice and kind of the deeper advocacy that I think all of us have been a part of. And it's not as if those things are mutually exclusive. They are automatically probably have interrelation to one another. But how do you see heightening those kinds of elements more, or do you see an importance of heightening those elements even more than they are today to be effective in getting to that transformational change? Meaning, you know, we all see what's happening. We all have our sense of things. We all need to know that there needs to be this bigger upswell that happens. And I think it was, I can't remember which one of you said, but we at CELDF have been sort of, what is that tension between culture, let's say, and law as one thing? But how do you guys see, or how have you seen things like art, culture, and advocacy coming together effectively? Or how could it come together effectively if it really hasn't been, knowing that there are nuances with all of those things?
It's a great question. Let me know when you get the answer.
Well, that's why we brought you guys here, because you have all the answers. So
Yeah, I mean, I think it's challenging, but one of the things that comes to mind is long-term planning. I mean, the fact that this is the second event of a series of events, which I didn't attend the first part, so I don't know how exactly that went. I did see some of the videos, but knowing that this is part of a long-term organizing process that y'all are engaged in and helping to facilitate seems really important to me, because I think that in any organizing effort like this, you need a real long-term perspective like that in order to, I don't know, in order to keep pushing forward over time and to recognize the fact that that things take time to develop. Another piece of this that comes to mind for me, and I'll just throw this out, I don't know how valuable this is, and I think you already know this, but one of the key things when organizing to me is to identify people who I've heard called organic leaders. And an organic leader isn't necessarily somebody who's the official leader of an organization. In fact, it's often not. It may be a person who has no official position whatsoever, or no formal power whatsoever, who, but there are people who those around them listen to and pay attention to. And, in my mind, they're people who are respected by other people. And the words that they say carry weight. And so, I really appreciate events like this, for the opportunity as an organizer to connect one-on-one with people and in small groups with people, and to sort of identify, not just organic leaders in sort of a utilitarian way, like I'm going to use this relationship with this person, but in a real human way, to develop connection and to know, okay, I met this person, we had this connection, we had this relationship, and when the time comes, or when there's the right opportunity for it, like I want to connect with them again. I want to keep working on developing this relationship and see what comes of it. And yeah, that I guess I'm repeating myself, but that seems like an important element of an event like this, is just the long-term planning and continuing to develop the relationships. And that's one thing that seemed unique about this as well to me, is that it wasn't just open to anyone from the public to come. It was something that you specifically invited people to, from what I understand. For specific reasons.
Yeah, for this, we obviously had, sort of a selection process of sorts, for whatever the reasons may have been. There were different factors, but I mean, part of my question, or my question maybe was leaning more towards less about those 2 days, but more just in the world that each of you are in now, like, how are things from those 2 days potentially applicable as you see them? Max, for instance, we were talking before we got our conversation going here about your artist friend, depicting this story about the devastating impacts to this rush to put, wind farms out into the Pacific Ocean, and there's like a perfect example in my brain of how, art and culture and advocacy kind of converged here. Like, it's a different way to tell story, different way to create relatability, maybe a different way to have an impact. And just kind of curious of those kind of things, like, are we being as effective as we can to kind of relate to one another and connect with one another in order to mobilize in a way that we haven't yet, to push for that transformation? And so, that's kind of maybe a more clearly what I was trying to get at with that question for the three of you.
So let me try that again. I'll try that also. I agree with Max. It's a very important question. Like, for me, I perform as a tree doctor, which I may have mentioned to people. I'm an MD PhD from Hopkins who became a tree because I got tired of Western medicine's approach to health. So you ask the question, what do trees and forests tell us about health? So I've been trying to figure out what it means for me to be an artist. And what I will hope to get from Andrea, by the way, I was at Huntington Bank yesterday, demonstrating against the bank that does pyrolysis. And we had a bunch of signs, and we was direct action. But the idea that Andrea actually works with the activists on the ground to make art that then gets taken into a direct action was, to me, interesting in terms of a specific skill set that I might learn. So I guess to your question that Max said is a great question. In order to see how art really can change, I mean, if you want to say what comes first, law or culture, I can ask what comes first, change in culture or art, because art tends to be in the forefront. And I will say this, having been at the Holden Arboretum for a strategic planning session, I forgot to mention that today. The museums and university circles besides MoCA ought to be doing something in a coordinated fashion. And someone mentioned collaboration. When I was at Oxford in the UK, all the museums in Oxford each had an exhibit on Climate Hope, climate music, a curated event on climate and hope. So this idea that it's collaboration and it is getting into the artwork and trying to do the artwork yourself if you feel like you want to take that on, that's when we're going to learn the answer to your question. Although we can look back in history and look at how art has changed culture, as you do when you go to the Museum of Art, for example. So that's a few sounding somewhat random comments to your question.
Right. Anybody else want to jump in on that before we move on? I got a couple other things I'd love for us to dive into. If something else pops up, feel free. Something stuck with me, Max, at the beginning when you were talking in relation to the book you co-authored there, Bright Green Lies, and which was this kind of question, and which was also obviously the lead-in term for this event, truth. And it has me wondering what the three of you see around just the level of honesty that people or organizations are really at in relation to what we're really facing. Meaning, are they really being honest about what needs to be done or what should be done to really drive into that right relationship? Like, what are you seeing out there? What are you experiencing through your research, through your reading, through your activism? Like, what is that level of honesty these days? Just, out there, despite maybe the evidence, is it commensurate, I guess? Are we being honest enough, or do we need to be more honest and face even harder truths? Or yeah, I guess what's your sense of that for the three of you?
I guess my sense is that none of us know how to fix the problem. Or if we do, that knowledge is largely theoretical, in that we may have a sense of what the problem is made of, how the problem's organized, the systems of power behind it, et cetera, but the intermediate steps between getting where we are right now today to the point that we need to get to in order to transform that world are largely unknown. I mean, that's not to say we have no idea what we're doing, but I think it's just a realization or a recognition that all of us are organizers. When I say us, I mean organizers, people who are actively working on these issues, are just doing the best we can in the face of a set of crises that are massive. I mean, bigger than anything that people have ever faced before collectively. And so I feel a sense of humility in the face of that. And I think there's sort of levels of where people and organizations and institutions are at in terms of grappling with that. I think the culture as a whole is mostly in a state of complete disconnect from the reality of life on this planet, and dissociation, as I mentioned earlier, from the planet and our relative. I mean, when Summer, I know when you talked about this at the event, but when people say our relatives, talking about the other life on this planet, it's not a metaphor. It's not some people want to make that into some sort of very romantic idea. It's just the truth. I mean, we're related to all the life on this planet directly. There are our relatives. It's the family of life. And that family is in crisis. And so, yeah, I don't think there's much honesty. I think, in my opinion, a lot of the reason why people don't grapple with the full extent of the problem that we're facing, and the likely fact, in my opinion, that we're going to need, really radical movements of transformation and real sacrifice, real conflict and confrontation, real challenging times ahead in order to transform this. I think it's really comforting for people to think that that's not going to be necessary, to think that people in power, politicians or corporations or institutions, scientists have it all figured out and are going to take care of us. I think it can be profoundly destabilizing and scary to sort of recognize that nobody's really steering the ship, or at least if they are, then they're sort of sociopathic, or at least the corporate imperative, the profit imperative impelling all these people and institutions is sociopathic. It has no concern by nature for people and for the natural world and water and future generations. And so, yeah, I think I used to be that young, sword rattling, radical activist who was like, "Come on, everybody, we need to get out there and, why don't you get off your butts?" And just sort of, I had this anger about it, And as I've gotten older, I've realized that, there's parts of that attitude that I want to hold on to, or that are valuable, I think, but a lot of that is not helpful. And I have tried to have more compassion and understanding for why people are not able to do the emotional grappling with the future that we're facing and the actions that are needed to change it. And, I think a lot of that has to do with profound trauma in our cultures, in our communities, disconnection, addiction, a whole culture built on dissociation, whether it's, drugs and alcohol, or, TV binging, or, addiction to a million different things, shopping, pornography, like a million different video games, all these tools to just keep people from actually being present in their bodies, on the planet, on Earth, in this place. And I think recognizing that, it's obviously there are a lot of people who've recognized that for many years. It's not, an original thought by any means. And it also doesn't necessarily provide a way out to recognize that. It doesn't make the issue easier to solve in some ways. But so yeah, I guess I feel like I'm in a process of evolution on these issues, and trying to understand, one of the phrases that somebody told me years ago is that I really loved was, meet people where they're at, but don't leave them there. And that's what I've always tried to do as an organizer. And there are a lot of people who've had that influence on me as well, meeting me where I'm at and not leaving me where I am. And so, yeah, that's some thoughts that I have on that topic.
Summer or Peter, just on this idea of kind of levels of honesty people are at around what is and what needs to be done.
I was waiting for Summer to let me say I use the word wetico, an indigenous word, which means the kind of craziness, monstrous craziness we have in our culture, where the whole culture is basically false. Modernity is based, many aspects of modernity and neoliberalism are based on ideas that to me are fundamentally falsehoods, false against nature, false against humans. So I think there's an awful lot of untruth. And I'd be very much interested in having a conversation with Max specifically, because I was blown away by the attempts to sell pyrolysis as recycling plastics. It is the most amazing game of language and lying with statistics that have once again hoodwinked a corrupt Ohio legislature that also defined natural gas as a green, as not a, what do they do? It was either they defined it not as a fossil fuel or that it's a green source of energy. So yeah, there is an enormous amount of distortion. My own work has been with fighting the pharmaceutical industry because this is a hugely malignant force that's driving our healthcare system bankrupt and doing very little for people. So yeah, I think truth. And the problem with reconciliation is you have to recognize the falsehoods before you can reconcile against them. And these falsehoods are so built into the fabric of our society that the indigenous people, and I'd love someone to comment about this, are right to think that settler colonialists were literally mad in some of their belief systems. And look what they did with them.
Some thoughts here, ideas, experiences?
Yeah, just what Peter was touching on. For us, we call it, you're talking about Wendigo, right?
Yeah, it's spelled different ways. Wendigo
Yeah.
or Wendigo. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
I am.
Yeah, for us, we speak on it as it being a Wendigo, and that's just sort of like I don't want to use the word spirit because then people think like it's hokey pokey kind of stuff, but it's sort of like speaks to being consumed by all the things that Max had described, having your mind focus on greed, power, whether that be through video gaming, food addictions. It's something that leads your mind out of the present moment, and it feeds on the past, or it can feed on the future. It can feed on anything that is taking you away from what actually matters, and it can consume you. And I think that a lot of people, in talking about honesty, I think people are just afraid. People just, usually when you're afraid, you don't want to deal with it. You don't want to look at it. You don't want to hear about it. You don't want anything to do with it because it's hard to face. It's hard to face and look at what's coming for our future generations. And especially when it's just, it feels so overwhelming that it's like there's just so much change that needs to happen. And like Max said, it has to be radical. And that means sacrifice. That means sacrificing a lot of the luxuries that we have, a lot of the things that we're used to. And I think most people just can't handle that. Which I mean, I don't even know how you deal with that, like how we can change. And I mean, yeah, taking small steps here and there, but the problem is so enormous. All these little small steps sometimes feel like they're just not making much of an impact, So I don't know what the answer to that is. I think it's probably a combination of things. Reconnecting to nature. That's a huge one, because like how are you supposed to have any kind of relationship with any of these relatives on this planet if you don't actually spend time with it? Just even within our own relationships, if you can't have a relationship with your brother or your sister if you're not really actually spending time with each other, whether that be through communicating over the phone or, you know, seeing each other every once in a while. Most people just don't go outside that much anymore. Most people don't sit and be quiet with the water or sit and be quiet with the wind. You know, most of us don't even think it's something that's just laughable, you know, to hug a tree or to, you know, lay in the grass, but that's grounding and it's also healing. You know, and there's lots of science on it that, you know, that it does actually help our well-being. But even with all of that, people still are still just disconnected. And I honestly, I feel like it's just such an overwhelming thing to think of. I don't really know what the answer is.
Yeah. I mean, listening to the three of you and sort of relating it back to the time we had together in April, and then also where we all sit today and where we're going, you know, it's interesting you used the words you did, Summer, because we'd kind of framed our time together as about, you know, grounding, exploring, connecting, and then the moving forward. And I feel like we've been touching on all those things here in our conversation today. And then it kind of as my maybe lead out question to the three of you is maybe taking one or the other approach here, which is, you know, what are maybe some of those sources of opportunity or light or possibility that you are seeing, whether it's small or big, you know, just to kind of understand that there are things in our people or there are ideas out there that maybe has some resonance despite the magnitude of what we're up against. And then if there are other kinds of challenges that we haven't gotten to, I'd love to hear that as well. I mean, I've heard, you know, the just the level of falsehoods that we contend with on a daily basis, that we're educated on, we're enculturated into, you know, the various kinds of addiction, just the levels of and varieties of greed, and then also to what you just mentioned too, Summer, just the sheer amount of fear that, you know, can create paralysis. You know, those are definitely what I would see as challenges. And just curious if there are other kind of challenges you're seeing in the work that each of you are doing. I may see the three of you as you are doers, you are wise ones, you're educators, you're organizers, you're action-oriented people. So are there other challenges you'd want to convey here in this session we have now? And then also, what are maybe some of those kind of promising elements that you're seeing, again, whether it's something small or big, you know, those opportunities that really feed into this idea that we've also been touching upon, which is getting into right relationship, or, you know, amplifying the right relationship we already might be in, but not on the scale that it needs to be. So yeah, have at it. Either kind of more challenges or more sort of ideas, possibilities, opportunities, ideas, resources that you're involved with or coming across in your own worlds.
So I'm going to say three quick things. And I just heard Jen Bendel, Deep Adaptation, and part of Jeremy Lint's Deep Transformation Network. Both those guys, and I consider myself among them, have had this recognition that Max was alluding to. This is not a problem to solve. This is something that we need to be humble and we need to look for emergence. And we are going to have a lot of suffering ahead of us. What Summer, I think, is emphasized, and I would agree, find communities, maybe it's CELDF, maybe it's Walpole Island or whatever, where you can, as many sages said, live the change you want to be. So you give up a certain amount of false hope about a big transformation that humans can direct. You accept what we want to see and you see what happens. And there's one other thing I say all the time, because I study disasterology and catastrophe. You know, I studied the demise of civilizations in the past. And that is, I'm not worried that human beings don't have an answer to this problem. Mother Nature has an answer to this problem. It's just we won't like what her solutions are because it's going to include reductions in human population and others. So, I mean, this idea that there are forces beyond us, we have to seek out the good spirit and recognize that the evil spirits exist, and we need to fight them, but not fight them with an expectation that somehow good will triumph over evil in a simplistic way.
I think one of the things that is hopeful is that when we're talking about spirit is just forever, you know, regardless of what happens on this planet, our spirits are still going to go into whatever realm, spirit realm that it goes into. That doesn't mean like we're still all going to be connected regardless of this human form that we have. And just the fact that that is it inside this human shell, that it has the power to create, just, you know, with the energy that we put out. I think that also can have a profound impact on this planet and all the living beings that we cohabit with. That's one thing that, you know, for myself, that eases my fear, that this spirit, that the spirit of my children, that the spirit of my ancestors, that we're all still connected, we're all still going to be here regardless of whatever form that it's taking place.
Yeah, I would echo what both Summer and Peter have said. I guess I would say, you know, for me, it's always a question of what can I do and how can I continue to push myself. That's something that's sort of been a guide for me in my activist work over the years, has been my relationship with my own conscience and the important role that plays in action, because, you know, I've been involved in some stuff that was scary and that's risky, and you know, I'm being sued by a mining company right now, and you know, made various sacrifices, and that's always the way I look at it is, you know, what's my relationship with my own conscience. And I try not to approach that in a Catholic way. I wasn't raised Catholic, so but I'm not doing that from a sense of like I must sacrifice myself or something like that, because, you know, it's just such a blessing to be alive in this world. I mean, even though life can be profoundly hard at times, you know, we all experience, you know, the sublime beauty and joy and all of those things. And I feel like, you know, it's my responsibility in return for getting to experience that beauty, that I have to do as much as I can to preserve it and protect it for the future. And yeah, so that's a question that I'm always thinking, you know, it's really easy to think about, you know, other people making the sacrifices or doing the hard thing, and less easy for us to think about it ourselves. And that's one of the ways that I approach this work is, you know, ultimately I have no control over what other people do, what anyone does except me. And so literally the only thing I can do is act in a way that is in accord with myself. And you know, of course, that will include speaking to other people and hopefully inspiring them, and hopefully encouraging them, and training and sharing my knowledge, and organizing with them and collaborating and so on. And so, you know, by doing that, helping other people to take action as well. But But ultimately, I have no control over that. So I just try and focus on what I can control, which is what I do. And beyond that, I just have to trust that hopefully it'll have some impact. And I don't know if it will. Things certainly aren't headed in a great direction on the planet right now. But here we are. This is where we are, and I can do what I can do. And so when I do that, I feel right. And when I don't, or when I get off track, then I feel like, okay, I gotta reorient here and get back on the path.
Well, I highly appreciate the time we've got to spend together here today. I find that to be very energizing towards what that last question was getting to. Appreciate the three of you as to who you are and what you're involved in. Appreciate the fact that you took the time to meet there in Cleveland, coming from close by or for far away. Yeah, I think this is all the right kind of layers of intention and just energy and eventually into the specific kind of things we have to do. I think this is how it all feeds into that. And again, the hope of the event that we had, the Truth, Reckoning, and Right relationship with the Great Lakes event there in April was to kind of try to kick some of that loose, and more still to be done, and the three of you are doing it, of course. For those who've listened to this, if you want to understand more what we've been referring to, there are videos on the CELDF YouTube channel. There's a playlist for Truth, Reckoning, and Right relationship where you can get a flavor for what took place in October with the testimonies, and also a bit of what took place here in April of 2024 with part 2 and the gathering we had for those couple of days. Max, Peter, Summer, super appreciative again. Thanks for your time, and I'm sure our paths will not just cross, but will converge in effective ways beyond this time together tonight. Thank you.